快过啊！我大不坏吃。 I am CNN meteorologist Tom Sater. We are live to discuss the recent eruption of the volcano Taal in the Philippines. Because we are live, we're going to explain a little bit about the history, what the residents are going through, some of the factors that have really brought this to the front page of every paper, and of course live on networks across the world, including us here at CNN. But also you'll have a chance to ask questions. Just put those in the comments below, and I'll try to answer those the best that I can toward the end of this little explainer. Now, you're going to be seeing some video, and everything you see here is from the eruption that started and occurred at 2:30 in the afternoon Saturday in the Philippines. I'll run through a Google Earth to show you where this is. We're going to run through history, which is extremely important to get a better understanding of everything about this volcano. The makeup, one of the smallest volcanoes in the world. We're also going to talk about how it's the lowest volcano in the world. But because it's the lowest, it doesn't mean much. Because it's the smallest, we're starting to learn that doesn't mean much in geological history as well, because this is known, this volcano is known for, historically speaking, its violent, powerful eruptions that have taken numerous lives throughout the decades and even the centuries. So again, let's start off with the basic photos that we have been seeing now. Of course, this taken just after the eruption. What you're seeing here, this plume, this is not a pyroclastic event. Now, pyroclastic means there would be molten lava flying in this major eruption. That's a major eruption. This is what we call a steam-driven eruption. And when I get in closer, and you actually be able to see a little bit with some of the video and the photos we're showing, it's really interesting where this is placed in southern Luzon, Batangas area. I'll show you that. But it's surrounded by water. It's actually got quite a few little factors to it. There's quite a bit of water with it, and that's playing a major role, because when that water seeps in down below inside the volcano and starts to get superheated by the molten lava and the magma, it's just like a steam engine. So not only is it spewing steam, but it's also like boiling water. I mean, that is a main factor here. So it's not a pyroclastic event, not yet. This could lead to that, and that's the biggest fear for everyone who lives in the region. This plume, well over a mile into the sky, well over a couple of kilometers. In fact, at one time it continues to rise up to about 15 kilometers, but it was spewing rocks and pebbles and ash as far as 6 to even 9 miles, it's said in some areas. This was an image taken by a flight that was getting ready to land in Manila. Now, jet engines cannot fly through volcanic debris. Those engines kind of really start to heat up all the chemicals in this ash, and then they super cool them. It becomes like rocks, and it just tears up flights, plane engines. So again, they cannot fly through this. So they did suspend flights in and out of Manila Airport, and for good reason. Here's another image off to the side. You'll see some of the water. And when I show you the Google Earth, you'll get a good understanding of what we're watching here. But there are a number of villages, mainly fishing villages. A good 16,000 have been evacuated in from around the crater lake, or this caldera. But it is covered with ash. You can almost see kind of a gray film with this. And to get in closer, this was part of the problem. Transportation, you almost couldn't get through. It was like a thick sludge and mud. Rain created with this ash, a shower passing through, really created this mess. So again, not only was visibility reduced, but they couldn't see with that ash mixing with, of course, the rainfall on the windshields. But they're scraping this by hand. Again, they don't have the heavy technology in this area. The actual plume at 2:20 in the afternoon, 2:30, was picked up on Himawari satellite imagery, and it moved directly north. Now, the volcano itself is south of Manila, about 11 kilometers, about 37 miles or so, or excuse me, 50 kilometers. And inside that, of course, as the plume moved north, the nighttime images started to come out, and everyone could start to see creating its own lightning. This is not unusual. It happens with most volcanoes. There's even some video, you probably have seen it online. I mean, when you have this kind of a heat transfer, amazing amount of energy, like thunderstorms, when there's hail and other debris in these thunderstorms, it creates friction and you can get the lightning. So again, that's a frightening image all by itself, with that ash falling. Now, again, we talked about the automobiles. This is a big deal here because as long as it continues to spew ash and that plume moves in different directions as the wind shifts, more and more communities are going to be affected by this. All right, southern Luzon, Batangas. This is Taal Lake. It used to be called Bonbon a long, long time ago. The volcano is actually in the center, inside a lake in this caldera, in this cone. Then you have the larger caldera surrounded by much more water. It's very interesting. But again, one of the smallest in the world, the lowest in the world, so just over 1,000 feet high, about 300 meters. But one of the more potent ones because of all the water and the resources it has to create this steam engine. What we do not want is that pyroclastic event. Now, let's talk about history because the fishing villages are surrounding this water area, which were the first to be exposed to this ash and, of course, some of the violent shaking. But to back up just a little bit, this was an abrupt eruption. This was sudden. There was no warning whatsoever like we have in so many other volcanoes around the world. This actually is one of 24 active volcanoes in the Philippines. And again, it's on the Ring of Fire, so therefore it's quite active. Let's go back and look at the history. What we know is the most powerful volcanic eruption was in 1754 and lasted for 6 months. It exploded in a violent eruption from the month of May all the way through November. So again, that's something you don't hear about very often. This was an inhabited area until 1911, when one of the more deadly eruptions, again, it's known for its violent eruptions, a pyroclastic event with molten lava sliding through the villages, wiped out over 1,300 people who lived there. So after that occurred, it was called and declared a permanent danger zone. No one could live there. However, it went quiet and it went silent for 54 years. And when you have that period of quietness and you have a population that's booming, people start making their way back. Well, in 1965, about almost 200 people lost their lives with another violent eruption, not as strong as in 1911 or definitely not 1754. But then, of course, we go back to 65. This is that quiet period here again. Notice this. After 1965, we had smaller subsequent eruptions, 1966, 67, 68, even in 1976, and then 1977. During these smaller quakes, not as violent, the topography and the main structure of the volcano changed. Side vents were created. In fact, they believe on Saturday that this eruption, even though it was steam driven, created a side vent. More on what's been happening now. Since 1977, nothing. Here is a point of view camera set on this at 5-minute increments. So again, abrupt, no pre-warning to this, and all of a sudden it explodes in this violent eruption and we lose the camera. So again, with that, of course, the rumbling, they've said that they've had about 150 tremors since then. However, if you were to go on the USGS website, you'd be hard-pressed to find them because most of these are under a threshold of 2.5 magnitude. They're like 1.0 to 2.0. Now, yesterday, this is the next phase now. As you take a look, we now have sure signs of a lava fountain. This is the sign now that tells us after the steam event occurred and that eruption, we're now seeing magma which is making its way toward the surface, and you now have these fountains. So that's the next step telling us this is not through with displacing its energy. It is not over with. So therefore, we talk about the levels of warnings, the alert levels. And that's what we're going to go and talk about now, because on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 is a major eruption. Now, when it first occurred, they went right to a 3. Minor eruption taking place. You can kind of see it here. 4. Then it wasn't too much later, they moved this right to a 4. Now, when you talk about a 4, what does that mean? Well, first they have an excursion zone. They clear out everybody from about 9 kilometers. Well, they have since moved that out to like 10.5 and now 12. Originally, 16,000 fishing villages, where 16,000 people, that is, were evacuated. Now they're looking at 500,000 because what may be possible? A pyroclastic event. So level 4 means right now, frequent strong ash explosions. Lava dome is growing. We saw that with that lava fountain pictures now. Hazardous eruptions possible in the hours or days ahead. Here's what we do not know. We live on human time. We live in the here and now. All of us do. This is geologic time. Is it possible it may not erupt? Absolutely. Could it go months and months without an eruption? Yes. Could it never erupt again? Absolutely. But it could also occur in the next couple of days. We're seeing the signs. It's not an exact science. Wind direction is important. This is flight level. Yesterday, on Saturday, it was coming up from the south. Now, in the Philippines, which we cover a lot, they have usually a northeast monsoon. It comes in directions across northern Luzon. Well, now we're starting to see the flight levels move it from, of course, west to east, which means that plume, even though it's now moving up toward Manila, it's going to start to slide toward the Ryukyu Islands. So in the days ahead, we'll probably see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of that plume across higher elevation flight level. Surface winds a little different. They're kind of coming in the opposite direction. But just to give you an idea of how much they've been dealing with in the Philippines, in the months of October, November into early December, major earthquakes killing dozens of people down in Mindanao, one after another. Then they had a Christmas Day typhoon that moved in toward Tacloban, the same city that back in 2013 lost 6,000 in Super Typhoon Haiyan. Well, Christmas Day typhoon moved across the area, killing over 60 people as well. So now they're dealing with a volcano. Now, to go on past this, I'm going to start to take some questions, just a few more images I'd like to show you. Rainfall, which was causing that ash to become this thick sludge, really is not in the forecast, which is good news. But again, when it comes to the Philippines, any onshore flow of air can create an uprise and a thunderstorm cloud, and they can really pick up some rainfall easily. Here's a great photo, if you can see this one. This man on the fishing village, volcano in the center of Lake Taal, and you can start to see how he's just covered in ash, doing the best he can with some water just to clean this up. But this is an area now that has been completely evacuated. No rain in the forecast. Temperatures are quite warm, 31. You're talking about, almost 90 degrees there. But again, we're going to start to talk about, some of the terminology. But let me just jump in and maybe take a question or two. Kevin is asking, what are the effects to the surrounding areas, impacts on wildlife? A couple of photos that I'll show you in just a little bit. The ash is so thick right now that we do have video and photos that people are trying to do the best they can just with a hose. Obviously, the impacts on wildlife are going to be the same for humans. The biggest effect right now is breathing the ash. Even though a lot of the images we see, it's just this gray cloud. It's like a real bad polluted day like we see sometimes in Beijing or New Delhi or what have you. Those fine, small particulate matter is so small that it's easily inhaled into the lungs. But the issue with ash is, and many people may not know this, ash has, it's kind of a consistency of glass shards. I mean, they're microscopic, some are a little bit larger, but there's a lot of glass in this violent eruption that we have. Even with a steam-driven event, pyroclastic is much worse, but as the ash is falling and you're breathing that, you're actually breathing in glass shards. So the rainfall, in a way, can kind of help that and compact that into the air as it falls, and maybe you won't be inhaling as much. So that's one of the bigger concerns. All right, tephra. Tephra is the ash fall. We have, of course, our eruption column that was, a good 15 kilometers in the sky. The next thing, and what we do not want to see, is what we call a lahar. That is a debris flow, if you will. Many times with volcanoes, we talk about these side vents getting blown out, which become new chambers later on in the life of a volcano. But these create terrible debris flows that can go on and on and on. And then, obviously, the worst thing you want is a pyroclastic flow or event. We saw this in Kilauea when we had those lava flows that seemed like for weeks and weeks and weeks. But the pyroclastic event, that is just massive. And that's what killed over 1,300 back in 1911. I think part of the problem is if you look at the area surrounding this volcano, if you go out just 100 kilometers, you've got 25 million people who live within that short area. So a pyroclastic event today is going to be much worse than it was back in 1750 or even 1911. But it's those periods of calmness that so many people started to move back into around the area. All right, I believe we're going to have another question coming up, but also one of these may have to do with this. But let's go to this one. This is coming up even as we speak. Kathy asks, if it rained, would it cool down the volcano from erupting? All right, no. Rain is only going to take that ash and bring it down and coat everything else, which is already, we're seeing, that one of the problems, and it may seem minor really, just traveling around, the visibility reduced. It's on the vehicles. They can't clean them off very well. Some areas do not have a great plumbing system with running water. So even just getting an area that could clean your vehicle, for one, is a little bit difficult. But nothing's going to cool down an event like this. I mean, volcanoes, 90% of them that are active surround the Ring of Fire, around the Pacific. And so obviously the Philippines. Many people are also kind of wondering, well, we've heard about it's possibly triggering a tsunami. And what is that? Usually we talk about tsunamis when it comes to earthquake. Any displacement of land near water, basically underwater. If you displace land and you have all that water kind of fill that void, it starts to create a wave. So our problem is, and we've seen this before, parts of Indonesia in the last few years, Philippines obviously have seen them before. When you have a volcanic eruption, and let's say that you have this lahar, remember the debris flow, or an underwater landslide, it displaces that water as mentioned, and it could trigger a tsunami. Now, it's just, again, they're around a lake, so they would be the first to see maybe a mini tsunami, but I don't think we're going to have to worry about that right now with the evacuations away from the waters. It would have to be so violent that this one province in southern Luzon, if it could affect other provinces. Now, that's pretty hard to see. One quick couple pictures for you. This young man trying to clean up, of course, his crops, which is one reason many live here, because the fertile land, that's why they go and they try to farm around these volcanoes. You can just see how this area right now just coated. So it goes back to the question of how about wildlife and what are they dealing with. This is a motorcycle rider. This is shortly after the volcano erupted. He's covered in that rain-soaked ash, and you get to see it in his eyes. They've been through everything. Christmas Day typhoon, massive earthquakes down to the south in Mindanao in the last couple of months, and now they've got an erupting volcano. So your hearts go out to them. Keep them in your thoughts and prayers. And I hope it was a little educational. Thanks for those of you who wrote in some questions, and we'll continue to keep you updated in the next several weeks and months. Hopefully it will not go that long, but we really hope that this does not become a major eruption. It could, however, at any time in the next couple of days or even weeks. Thanks for joining me.